And welcome. It's stream time again. We are 1 week away from the primary release of Hope and Fear and a community gaming license / SRD update anticipated alongside that release on August 25th. So I'm very excited about those things, but they are still in the future yet, which means we have to talk about something else today. Glad to see folks here. Quick shout outs to the In Felix for kind of being in the chat for the first time and for following the channel. Thanks also to Took, I guess, who I imagine is somebody I met at Gen Con. Hi Took, thanks for following here, as well as Plato108 who followed between last stream and this week. Hello to Nerdy, Jaybird Things, Ed Entertainment, Barden Raven, and anybody else who is hanging out in the stream lurking. And thank you, hello, to folks that are watching VOD on Twitch or YouTube later on. So, this fall is going to be very busy for me. I'm going to have a lot to talk about and a lot of launches, and I hope that you all will have some patience for me as I have lots of things to talk about during this fall. If you want more things from me, this fall is should be very satisfying because I have an environments book that is close to being ready to release, which will go to patrons first. I have the crowdfunding campaign for Hope Dies Last, which is starting in September. My epic fantasy serial Born to the Blade is coming out in a new form in early September. I'll have more information about that when it's out and it's easier to point people to. And I am finishing up Dungeons of Drakkenheim, which will then go into layout. It may not be a fall release. That may be later than fall. But there's a bunch of things going on, and then other projects that I can't talk about yet because they haven't been announced. So there's just a lot going on. You may have noticed, if you are an avid Rascal News reader, that I have an announcements post out on the site. If you're not familiar, Rascal News is a tabletop games-focused, independent, worker-owned news site. And they provide this great service of having an announcements section where people in the community can log in, create a news story to go onto the Rascal feed through the announcements category. And a lot of people will just put something like a press release in, but what we, and by we I mean the Hope Dies Last team, so myself, the Infinite Citadel folks, and then some of the other collaborators we're working with, we've seen and gotten advice that with the announcements posts, you can be more informative, more general interest, and that may be more exciting and engaging to people. So rather than just a press release about Hope Dies Last, what we have is an essay meditating or reflecting on the kinds of anti-fascist storytelling that we're doing with these campaign frames, how the antagonists in each of those frames manifests different aspects of fascism that exist in our world, and some of how we view anti-fascist storytelling through games. So I would invite folks to go and read that article after watching the stream. Yeah, Nerdy says closer to an op-ed. It is sort of more in that vein. There's a great announcements piece from, I think, last year that was a discussion between the designer, art director, and artist. I think maybe they were only 2 people instead of 3 for a game called Hinterlight, just walking through the process of making a cover for the game, which is really fun because a lot of people don't have insight on what that process looks like if you haven't done it. So with this one, we're still talking about our project, but we're trying to contextualize it and put it into kind of a broader conversation about games of resistance or anti-authoritarianism and things like that. So you can check that out at rascal.news/hope-dies-last wants-u- so on and so forth. Hope Dies Last wants you to stick it to the man, and then everything is separated by dashes. Or you can just go to rascal.news and look at the announcements section and scroll down some amount depending on how long it's been since this original stream. Separate from that, if you just want to go directly to check out Hope Dies Last and follow the project, you can do that at ttrpg.fun/HDL. That's HDL for Hope Dies Last. And next week we are going to announce details for a follower bonus, where if you follow the campaign before launch and then back, you're going to get a special extra thing that otherwise is not available. Those are the most pressing announcements. And so now we're going to get into our topic, which is using soft moves in Daggerheart primarily, but also RPGs more generally. So my standard disclaimer that these streams do not represent Darrington Press or Critical Role. I am speaking only for myself and my own opinions about and preferences for how one plays and runs this game Daggerheart, right? Get your sheet together is one thing. What I'm doing is a different thing, right? They're both different in format and in who is doing them, who they speak for, all that kind of stuff. The latest Get Your Sheet Together with Experiences presented by Talos and Jaffe is very fun, so go and check that out. For today, we are going to be talking about this concept of soft moves and the idea of soft moves to hard moves as a continuum. I first experienced this set of terms reading the game Apocalypse World by Vincent and Mackay Baker. Soft moves and hard moves for me are most associated with the kind of the story games tradition of TTRPGs, and are somewhat reflective of the fact that in a lot of those games, the GM doesn't roll dice or have a spot in the initiative in games that use initiative. Instead, the GM makes moves based on structures and guidance that is at the kind of basic level of how the game works. For Daggerheart, the game talks about soft moves and hard moves in terms of what the GM does. So I would encourage folks to go and look at the GMing section in the core rulebook, because especially in that section, but not just there, the main book, right, the physical and ebook of the full thing, they have a lot more guidance and examples. And today we're talking about GM stuff. There's more support for GMs there. So if you're learning Daggerheart or trying to learn the game better, I think it's more useful to refer to the core rulebook than just working off of the SRD. If you are looking at things in terms of designing for the community gaming license, you're always going to want to refer back to the SRD as the source to be checking, but there's a lot of information otherwise to access. So I'm going to quote from the SRD because that's the thing that's cool to do. Soft moves go easier on the players. They give the party new information about the scene and offer them an opportunity to react to it. And then hard moves are harsher, more impactful, or more direct. The PCs don't get an opening to interrupt, alter, or anticipate the outcome. And then there's also some guidance on the same page. Use softer moves on rolls with hope and harder moves on rolls with fear. And this all comes from page 65 of the SRD. You can get similar material, but with a lot more guidance and examples on pages 152 and 153 of the Daggerheart core rulebook. So if you've got your book on hand, those are some good pages to have open to be able to refer to things here. As I said earlier, I see soft moves and hard moves as existing along a continuum, so that there isn't just a hard divide of these things are only soft moves, these things are only hard moves. You can use certain kinds of GM moves in a way that is more of a hard move or more of a soft move. And I want to talk a little bit about that, but also talk about some of the example GM moves that are in the book and the SRD, characterizing them as being more likely to be soft moves or hard moves, or moves that you can utilize as soft moves. And then as we go, if you have questions about using soft moves or what they are, or how to decide when to use a soft move versus a hard move, and GMing questions like that, you're welcome to throw them into the chat. And if you're watching on VOD later on, the best place to post questions is on YouTube, on the VOD there as a comment on the video. If you're a patron, you can also ask questions on my Patreon. There will be a post there about this stream, so that's a great place to put those as well. One thing that a place I've kind of settled on as a GM that is informed by everything in how the game is written, but is maybe not as clear, as overtly written in the core book, is that I will tend to do my softest moves when the players roll a failure with hope. I will do a harder move on a success with fear, and then my hardest moves I save for a failure with fear. And that the core book does talk about, that the failure with fear is what's going to prompt the hardest move as a GM. Because we have this biaxial results system, right? There's success and failure, and then there's hope and fear. And there's those 4 types of results, and then a critical when the dice roll the same number. We can't just have like harder to softer, along the one axis, because this biaxial system gives us that texture. It gives us more dynamics in terms of like musical dynamics, where it can be softer or it can be louder, and you can move back and forth, not just in pacing, but also in volume, right? Dynamics as being going from pianissimo, right? The softest you could possibly play or sing, all the way up to fortissimo, however many Cs, right? I don't know that I've seen more than 3 on a piece of sheet paper. So generally I think about it as 3P to 3F, right? P for piano, F for forte. Anyway, that's your short musical digression. Because we have good reason to use soft moves when the players fail with hope, I wanted to talk about soft moves because I think hard moves are easier to fold into when we talk about fear moves and things along those lines. And soft moves are a really powerful tool, both for creating that sense of dynamics, right? Where you do setup and then you do follow through, right? You do a soft move to establish something, and then a hard move to really hit it home. Using soft moves can add texture to a scene. It can let you bring the spotlight over to another aspect of what's happening in the scene, to emphasize what's going on or to provide contrast. So that is all really handy. In this stream, I want to give and explore some examples of the types of soft moves you might use in different situations. Daggerheart doesn't have a hard delineation between combat and non-combat, but there are types of scenes, right? So I've split some of these examples up into action sequence, exploration, and social scenes. Not necessarily to just be like the 3 pillars, like how it's established in D&D, but as a way of grouping and differentiating different types of scenes. With this, of course, this is all relative advice and it's very subjective, so use what works for you, and you're welcome to not use what doesn't seem to work for you, or give it a shot and then see how you like it, and figure out what you want from your Daggerheart game and how you want to do that, what works for you. Looking at our example GM moves on page 65 of the SRD, real quick, that list starts with show how the world reacts, ask a question and build on the answer, and then goes on from there. I don't want to read all of them because that's easy to find. I can see or interpret this list of GM moves as being roughly in order from softest move to hardest move. But I can give you a show how the world reacts that is a pretty hard move. I could use a PC's backstory against them, but in a soft move kind of way, right? I'm going to put you in a spot, but you can do something to alter the outcome. Some of the softest moves, or things like show how the world reacts, ask questions, build on the answer, make an NPC act in accordance with their motive. These are what, in a lot of other RPGs, we would think of as just kind of like bread and butter moves or actions that the GM takes just to kind of keep everything going along. In Daggerheart, we put them in context with this broader framing of GM moves. But soft moves are going to be a lot of what you use to just manage stage business and to set up things for the PCs to then interact with, right? Make a PC act in accordance with their motive might involve a PC comes into the scene and asks for something, right? A worried father runs into the tavern and shouts about how his son has been taken by skeletons and some cult, and they're going to go sacrifice him. The PC is acting in accordance with that NPC is acting in accordance with their motive. The motive is, I love my son and I want him to be safe, so I'm going to go and look for help, right? That is acting in accordance with your motive. In a lot of games, you might not necessarily even analyze a move that much because it's just a thing you do in storytelling. For me, one of the things that Daggerheart does that can be really useful is talking in the lens of, or using the grammar of some of these structures so that a broader range of things are put into that context. And maybe this is useful to you, and maybe it's not as useful to you. Show how the world reacts is a very flexible, very useful kind of soft move most of the time, right? If a player character does something terrifying or does something really dangerous that would have immediate consequences, that's a prompt for me to make a move as a GM, because that's one of the ways, or one of the instances where the GM guidance invites us as GMs to make a move. So if a player character says, and this is like, I'm trying to recalibrate to a real example, because the thing I went to is like exalted level kinds of stuff. But if a player character says, I'm going to pull out my sword and I'm going to cut all the ropes on the rope bridge, I show how the world reacts. The rope bridge falls. Necessarily, almost anybody on that rope bridge is going to fall off or be in danger of falling off. My action there, that move, is a proportionate response to what the player has done, because that's how the world would react. The player did the thing that is causing this dangerous event, but I'm the one who shows how the world reacts. So that is, to a certain extent, a much harder move. The magnitude of the move is bigger. But if I say the rope bridge drops and everyone on the bridge goes plummeting down to the water, that's a softer version, because in that move, there is the potential for someone to intercede and do something about what has happened. If instead I say, your blade cuts through all the ropes. The bridge falls down toward the ravine, and everybody on the bridge plummets down to a watery death. If I do all of that follow through to saying everybody on that bridge falls and dies, that's a harder move. So we have this ability to calibrate both in the magnitude of the action that we do, but also how much we follow through with any given move. If we introduce or set up a dangerous situation, but we don't follow through, that's a softer move, right? A soft move is a setup move. It can also be a prompt to a player character, right? You're creating the moment for them to take the spotlight and do something heroic in Daggerheart. Hello, Adventure Lies Ahead. Thanks for hanging out and lurking. I could ask a question and build on the answer in a way that is a very hard move. This is a thing that I have sometimes done in actual play. In Valorword, I have an example that I go to where I'm establishing new truths in the fiction through the way that I ask a question to a player. So I asked Brandon, my friend and one of the co-hosts of Speculate that I used to co-host with Brandon and Greg, I asked their character, how is it that you notice the sniper on the 3rd floor? In asking that question, I am establishing that there is a sniper on the 3rd floor. There is still the opportunity to respond to that, but I am shifting the fiction in a bigger way than I would if instead I was asking the question of, how are you keeping an eye out and making sure that there aren't any dangers in this scene? Right? That's still asking a question and building on the answer, because I might ask that and then Brandon as a player would say, oh, well, I'm looking at all of the entrances and I'm checking in with the guards to see what their body language is like and if any of them are giving any signals. With that answer, I could then build on it and say, you're sweeping through the room and nothing seems odd. And then as your eyes go up toward the 3rd floor, the double doors on the 3rd floor, you catch the glint of a glint of light on metal and see a sniper on the 3rd floor. It's taking me longer to get to there is a sniper, but I am still building on the answer to a question that I asked. So we have this capability of turning a dial, right? How much are you establishing at once? How much room are you giving for a player character to respond? Other moves that can be really good soft moves. Drive a PC to take action by dangling their goals in front of them, right? Introduce an opportunity for a player character to get what they want, but make them do something to seize it. You're very consciously creating the moment for someone to act. Signal an imminent off-screen threat, right? That could be as easy as you're fighting some monsters in the woods and you hear the crashing of trees in the distance as heavy footfalls come thundering toward you. The magnitude of what that threat is can be more or less. In signaling, I am setting up future danger, but it is not the move of spotlight an adversary that would be something like you hear thundering steps approaching and a Smilodon bursts through the brush, leaping to try to sink its paws into you, right? That's spotlighting an adversary. At least one of the ways of thinking about it. If it's imminent but off screen, that is more like the soft move version. So I think one of the ways that you can kind of unlock more possibilities in GMing with Daggerheart, or honestly with any games that has example GM moves, is thinking about how a given move can take different form in different magnitudes in different situations. You could take away an opportunity permanently, but it's a really small opportunity. You could use a PC's backstory against them to introduce a new danger, but not necessarily to foreclose on possibilities, which is a harder move. Okay. If y'all have questions as we go, please let me know. The next thing I want to do is talk about using soft moves in a few different kinds of scenes and sequences to unpack the possibility space. One of the things that I see not infrequently is people asking about, well, how do I use fear outside of combat? Using fear is a way of taking moves or making bigger moves. Having a stronger command of soft moves and how they can be used in different situations might then make it easier to understand when and how to make harder moves. So we're just kind of filling out or rounding out knowledge here. I'm going to move this so that it's down all on the same page and is easier to look at. So, soft moves in an action sequence. Here I am specifically not saying a combat, because combat is just one type of action sequence. I have a few times probably referenced John Rogers' essay on action scenes and fight scenes, where Rogers makes the argument that you shouldn't write action scenes. You should write suspense scenes where the way that the suspense is being resolved is action, where that there is some bigger question, and then action or violence is the language being used to answer a question or resolve an uncertainty. So action sequence is a broader way that we can define this. But what we mean is something where moment-to-moment motion through a space or physical dangers are relevant here, right? You can have a social scene that's really moment-to-moment. You could have exploration that's moment-to-moment. But here, I'm going to say like a fight scene is an action scene. Indiana Jones attempting to run away from the rolling boulder in Raiders of the Lost Ark, that's an action scene. It emerges from an exploration scene, and you can have an exploration scene that becomes an action scene because they're kind of in different, they're kind of operating on different planes or different axes. But yeah, having a more expansive view of action and stakes and consequences can make other types of scenes more emotionally resonant. Combat is one of a main way where you can make that happen, because a common failure mode of fight scenes in media is that they lack meaningful stakes beyond will the main character die? And in a lot of types of stories, the answer to will the main character die is no for 90% of the narrative, and then there's more uncertainty about it in like the last 10% because maybe the hero dies at the end. It's pretty uncommon in the storytelling tradition that a lot of us live within for a main character to die in the middle of a narrative. It's not impossible, and depending on the tone of your story, it may be more or less likely. But if a reader or viewer comes into your scene pretty confident that this is not when the main character is going to die, then if they get in a fight, there should probably be some other kind of stakes, some other uncertainty. Does the player, will the main character recover the MacGuffin? Can the main character protect the civilian? Will the main character learn the secret that this other person is trying to conceal? These other questions, which could be questions that you're asking of the player character, right? Like ask a question and build on the answer. Could be, are you going to go after the assassin, or are you going to give medical attention to the Baron who's just been shot. Right? That's an ask a question and build on the answer, but it's also drive a PC to take action by dangling their goals in front of them. If one of their goals was to get the assassin, or one of their goals is to gain glory, or maybe one of their goals is ensure that the Baron rises to power and becomes king. You could interpret that move that I make as show the collateral damage, right? The assassin shows up and then this thing happens. I could be use a PC's backstory against them. The Baron is their sibling. You want to capture the assassin, but your sibling was just shot. What are you going to do? Which is part of why I think ask a question and build on the answer is such a fundamental form of GM move, like such a foundational type of move, because on a very basic level, it is showing or creating motion within the scene and then demanding a response, or opening up space for a response so that the conversation can continue back and forth. So with that mini rant / essay about action stories, let's talk about some of the kinds of soft moves you might use in an action sequence beyond the examples we've already given. If you're in a fight, having a bruiser type adversary in Daggerheart do a big wind up and slow down to emphasize, hey, this powerful enemy is about to do something scary. That's a soft move because it's a wind up. It's not the follow through. You are setting up a thing that demands action, but there is time to do something about it. So I've done soft moves in combats where I have an enemy kind of wind up. I've also done a soft move that is this enemy leaps into the air, kind of hands and weapon above their head, and they're going to come down and just absolutely obliterate X target. But doing it as a soft move, I describe that and then say, what do you want to do? Or what are you going to do? Or how are you going to get out of the way of this attack? How are you going to protect the person that they're going after? A soft move can be very powerful because it is a prompt, or it's like an alley-oop for a player to then respond to with their character. A hard move follows through and then can create repercussions and ripples. That can also prompt character action, but it's a different rhythm. If you're a fencer, there's this idea of single tempo and double tempo. Double tempo is I attack and you block, and then having blocked, you then attack me, right? It's like attack and then I block, and then I attack and then I block. Italian masters of the Renaissance, in the Renaissance era especially, are associated with single tempo action, which is the idea that in one motion at the same time, you defend and attack. And that breaks the timing or breaks the rhythm of the fight, because if someone is fighting you and they expect that when you're attacking, let me be really clear. When someone expects that as they're attacking, they are safe because it's their turn in a dual tempo rhythm, they may not be able to defend themselves or expect to defend themselves. Whereas if you are able to read an attack coming in and both defend against it and counterattack, you are using one tempo, one unit of time to both defend and attack. When you attack you in single tempo like this, or counterattack in single tempo, it's incredibly hard for the other person to respond in time to defend themselves because they are kind of behind in the rhythm of the fight. Single tempo is a hard move. Single tempo is you see the situation and you blow through the preparatory steps. You don't wind up and attack. You just go forward and attack. Apologies if that was disturbing because of like the foreshortening thing there. When I get talking about fencing, I'll get excited. Dual tempo is more relaxed. It's wind up and then attack. By emphasizing the wind up, I'm both saying this is going to matter and I'm giving the players a chance to respond. Other types of soft moves can be reinforcements show up. That raises the stakes of the scene, but it's not enemies come into the scene shooting as they drop from their parachutes, right? That's a harder move because those attacks make a bigger impact on the scene. Similarly, having the adversaries move around is setting up future danger, and that can be a good soft move, right? You're in a fight scene, you're going back and forth, a player character tries to cast a spell and they get a failure with hope. Rather than attacking that player character, you could say, right, as the winds of fate like dissipate your spell, the adversaries see their moment to reposition, and this group is going to move over there. What do you want to do? Right? I've made a softer move than, well, because your spell didn't work, this enemy just attacks you. Another thing you can do in a soft move is monologue, right? If you've got a villain and the player characters are fighting them, you can use that opportunity given to you or the space given to you in a soft move to create dynamics in the scene. Instead of staying at the level of attack, response, you can do the thing of, right, if you're in a fencing kind of duel, right, the warrior is fighting against a villain, you're fighting, and the warrior gets a failure with hope on an attack. I could describe, right, as you make your thrust, the villain kind of raises their blade up in a powerful parry, and the two of you come close together, and the villain, tells you, like, I always knew that you were weak on the inside, right? And then the two of you push apart, and we go back to the player characters. You can use a different type of action or different type of move in the scene to cast shadow on, cast light on, give contrast to what is going on. Variety is the spice of life is a saying that I picked up along the way there. And so if you're just describing attacks back and forth with a villain, are you going to be as emotionally invested as if sometimes that villain is talking smack against you, right? Or a harder version of this kind of soft move would be use a PC's backstory against them. So in that same situation, if the scene is already really charged, I could make a soft move, but one that feels like it has more magnitude, more impact on the scene, by saying, right, the villain kind of raises their blade to parry your attack. The two of you like bind at the clash and come close together, and the villain says, the villain reveals something that kind of speaks to a player character's backstory. Spoilers for Star Wars Empire Strikes Back. In the fight between Luke and Vader, when Vader says, Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father, right? And they go back and forth, and Vader says, I am your father. That's using a PC's backstory against them, right? Well, Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father, right? The player character has Luke's player has a sense of, this is who my father was, right? Obi-Wan told me some new information, but now Vader is intimating that there's something else going on, right? Revealing an inconvenient truth is one type of GM move. Introducing a secret or revealing a secret that targets a player character's backstory, that is going to have more of an emotional impact in a lot of these situations because I am using the PC's backstory against them. So a soft move can have a big impact on the scene while still creating the space for a player to have a response before there's some kind of unstoppable follow through. Here, I'm going to take a drink. Jaybird thinks I want to call out your note there when I was talking about more enemies, another sniper, going back to our example of the sniper on the third floor, which is a great suggestion. Thank you. Captain Cosmo says, revealing true plans or goals could potentially work as well, though that might be part of a monologue. Yeah, right. That can be reveal an unwelcome truth or unexpected danger. Right? The villain says, did you really think that I did all of this just so that we could play soldiers slapping each other with sticks? And then the villain reveals that all of this was a distraction because there's something terrible happening somewhere else. That's reveal an unwelcome truth or unexpected danger, where the player character is trying to win a fight, and then I reveal that the villain has been masterminding this entire situation, that where you are and what you are doing right now is exactly what the villain wants you to be doing. That's an unwelcome truth. Another thing, and this kind of fits with the wind up, but in a action sequence, you can threaten something. So if we're in like a traversal sequence instead of a fight, I could say, oh, you're going across on this rope bridge. The harsh winds are kind of pulling at the bridge, and you see that the rope holding up one end is beginning to fray. Right? I'm showing how the world reacts. I am signaling an unexpected danger or kind of creating danger. This is shifting the environment. And I am setting up a harder move of shift the environment, the bridge falls, you all plummet to your toward death, or something like taken away an opportunity permanently. The bridge falls, you lose your chance to be able to chase the villain that you've been following and who got across the bridge before you. Threaten something is a setup. Take the thing away is the follow through. Threaten something is follow up, is a soft move. Take the thing away is follow through, is a harder move. Right? That's why take away an opportunity permanently is kind of at that far end of the GM moves list, if we're interpreting it as soft moves to harder moves. In exploration, a soft move could be, this is a dead end. The way that you're going actually doesn't take you where you think where you want to be going. It doesn't keep the group from being able to get where they're going, but it is an obstacle, right? Soft move in exploration could also be, right, asking a PC how they know or how they're tracking their quarry. So what are you looking for in terms of signs or trace of this enemy as you're tracking them through the woods? Like, oh, well, I'm looking for broken twigs. I'm looking for footprints in the mud. I'm looking for the signs of a camp where they took a break. Right? That's ask questions and build on the answer. A soft move in exploration can also be show how the world reacts. I ask, well, how are you going overland to track this cult who are on their way to do this big ritual? and they describe, oh, well, the druid is going to turn into a big bird, and then we're gonna ride on the druid, and then the fairy is also going to fly. So we're going to fly as our option there, and that's going to be way faster in our exploration. I could show how the world reacts, saying, oh, so you're flying around as a bird, and then the fairy is also up there. Cool. You hear the scream of a raptor as another avian predator swoops in toward you. That can be signal an imminent off-screen threat if I don't do as much follow-through, right? It could be you hear the cry of an airborne predator. That's signal an off-screen threat. I could spotlight an adversary having this, a rock or a giant eagle or something fly in and attack. That's a harder move. Because there is no hard differentiation between combat and non-combat, if the fiction allows or the fiction demands, you can pop in and out of combat as much and in as many different ways as you want to, because combat is just a part of the fiction. You're using the same rules. If you take damage not in a fight, it's still damage. Soft moves in exploration might also be dangling a goal in front of you, right? As you're making your way through the woods, Ranger, you spot the signs of this legendary beast that you have been hunting for the past 10 years. But its tracks lead in a different direction than the cultists that you're hunting. I'm driving a PC to take action by dangling their goals in front of them. And in doing so, possibly provoking a hard choice. Or I'm setting up the group to split the party, which then puts the other player characters in more danger because they don't have their ranger as backup. And if the ranger goes off on their own, well, now they're alone, and that's dangerous too. Soft moves in a social scene could be someone walks into the room, right? You're having a private conversation that you don't want to be overheard, and then exactly the person you don't want to overhear you walks into the room. That might be a fear move. I might spend a fear to have someone walk into the room, but it's still in some ways a soft move because I'm not doing something that is irrevocable, and I'm not doing something that can't get a response, right? Someone walks into a room and you don't want them to hear, your player here could still say, I want to try and move this conversation out to the veranda so that we can have our privacy again, right? They can react to it. Now, if someone walks into the room and then closes the only way in or out of the room behind them, that's a harder move in this social situation. Not as hard if there's still a window, because you do still have some options. But if we're thinking about these soft moves and hard moves through the lens of building blocks and moves of story, which is what they are, if we're thinking as storytellers, action provokes reaction. What possibilities have been introduced? What possibilities have been taken off the board? What things have been made more difficult, even if they are still possible? Answers to those will let us know where a move is relatively on this dial of softest move to hardest move. Other soft moves could be an NPC saying something provocative. Make an NPC act in accordance with their motive. They want to rile you up. But depending on what they say, that could be use a PC's backstory against them. The hard move version of that could be, I'm going to spend 2 fear. This courtier references your family's shame, and I need you to make a presence reaction roll, or and if you fail, you're going to lash out against this courtier because he's so infuriating. Right? That's a harder, much harder move version, because I'm both using a PC's backstory against them, and I am potentially forcing a type of reaction. That's harder than make a presence reaction roll or mark stress. And it's a harder move than this NPC insults you by referencing your family's shame. Because there isn't as much to it, I'm not declaring as much. There isn't as much follow through as there is when I say you have to make this roll or mark stress, or when I say you have to succeed on this roll or lash out. Soft moves in a conversation could also be the NPC asking you questions. It could be, as you're deep in conversation with this courtier, what you don't notice is a new danger, right? I'm following what's happening in the fiction. I'm introducing or signaling new danger, but I'm not immediately then following it through. So we're almost at an hour, and I'm going to try and do recap. If you have questions, please let me know. The biggest things for me about soft moves and hard moves, and understanding this continuum, and then having that framework in mind to be able to modify or contextualize or interpret the kinds of GM moves that you're making, or what you may want to do, is that a soft move advances the fiction by a smaller degree, because it still leaves the opportunity for reaction before the thing that you're doing reaches its completion. Introducing a countdown is a soft move. Ticking down a countdown is harder. Doing the thing triggered by a countdown completing is a harder move in a lot of situations, because the thing that has been building or in progress then finishes. If you want to make a soft move in a situation and the thing that comes to mind is a hard move, the simplest thing that you can do is ask yourself, what's the moment within this action where there is still the chance for the PCs to respond, right? If a boulder falls from above and crushes you, that's a harder move. What's the soft move version? A boulder falls from a cliff above. What do? It's still a big danger, but there's the chance to respond. An even softer version would be, you see a boulder shift on the cliff above you and you realize it's about to fall. Smaller magnitude action, and there's still the chance to respond. Soft moves can be impactful and meaningful in the scene, while still leaving the chance for someone to respond. And again, coming back to our fencing metaphor, a hard move does more all at once. It interrupts or disrupts the flow of the scene by doing something notable all at once. You don't get a chance to respond to this because I'm spending two fear to have this thing happen. If instead I say, this thing is about to happen, what do? They have the chance to prevent it. Another big takeaway is that using soft moves is good because it gives player characters a chance to exercise their character's motivation, to make choices of what are you going to do? How are you going to try to stop a dangerous thing, right? Heroes, one of the ways we can talk about heroes is heroes are people who take extraordinary action to save lives or to protect people from dangers. If you're only ever fully following through on dangers and the players don't have as much chance to stop it, you are not giving them as much of a chance to be a hero. And so in a game like Daggerheart, a game of heroic fantasy, soft moves are a way of creating an opportunity for a player to let their character be a hero, to show how they are a hero, what kind of hero they are. They're not the GM not getting to do as much. They are the GM using a different kind of move, a different kind of action within the story that can set up, can enhance what is going to happen in response. You don't always need to escalate just by making a bad thing happen. You can escalate by creating tension. And you create tension by introducing something and making it clear what danger is going to manifest if something doesn't happen in response. Jaybird Thing says, never thought about verb tense being a pretty useful metric for more intensity. A boulder is falling on you versus a boulder falls on you. Yes, right? You can just scrub back and forth within that action, within that moment. The farther you scrub back to the beginning, the softer the move, because the more of a chance for somebody to respond you're leaving, versus making a whole move all at once and not giving the player character the chance to react is a harder move, right? There are times when I will say, this enemy just hits you. Well, don't they have to make an attack roll? No, I spent 2 fear. They just hit you. It's going to be 12 damage. That's a harder move. Skipping over the normal resolution system is a harder move. And I spent resources to do it. Sometimes an adversary will have a thing that says, oh yeah, they deal direct damage. You don't get to use armor. That's a harder move because you are skipping over steps of the fiction, right? I have armor. That armor can protect me. No, this is a harder move. I'm bypassing that. We begin and end with the fiction. Their attack pierces through your armor and, hits you in the gut. Take 25 direct physical damage. We begin with the fiction. We would go into the mechanical layer, but the fiction has moved forward past your ability to do something about it with armor. And that's why the mechanical manifestation is direct damage is a harder move. Captain Cosmo says, so a hard move with reaction roll is a medium hard move since it can affect the outcome half damage, but not avoided. I think that's a great way of thinking about it, right? If you do something and there is a reaction roll, that there's the chance for a reaction roll, that's not as hard of a move, especially if on a successful reaction roll, they avoid the thing entirely. If a successful reaction roll instead is half damage, that's a harder move. If there's no chance for a reaction roll, that's even harder. If it is a danger and the player characters can make an action roll to preempt it or stop it entirely or avoid it, that's even softer of a move because when player characters make an action roll, they are more in control of what they are doing and they're more likely to be able to use their resources and their features and their experiences because they can color how they act because they're not as much put in a corner. So we can apply this lens as a way of understanding or thinking about a lot of different aspects of how the mechanics of Daggerheart play out, how they interact with one another, how they manifest what we're talking about in the fiction. Nerdy says, this is eye-opening. I'm very glad to hear that. I'm happy that this has been useful. So that is going to be all for this stream. I am going to remind everybody that you can follow the forthcoming GameFound project, Hope Dies Last, which is 3 campaign frames and a special mechanical nexus that I'm creating. The 2 new frames in the mechanical nexus are with Infinite Citadel, my friends Andrew, Matt, and Conlon, who are all cool game designers who have been doing their own stuff. They're probably best known for the game Mork Soul, which was crowdfunded last year. They did Morksol Mega Games at Gen Con. These frames that we're doing are Bastion of Hope, which I already wrote and released, where Andrew did layout and some kind of art directing and project assistance there. But 2 new frames. This Time Nobody Dies, which is a cyberpunk frame that's focused on kind of a death game city within a city. It's a little bit like Running Man meets Marathon meets Cyberpunk 2077. It is cyberpunk, but it is not so cynical that there's no chance of making things better. It's cyberpunk where you dare and hope to make things better, to overthrow the system, but there is the danger of being caught up within the system as you try to fight it. You can get more information about This Time Nobody Dies as a update on our GameFound page, and you can read all of that now and get more information about This Time Nobody Dies. And then Shine Your Last is the 3rd frame. That is a kind of Sword and Planet space opera inspired by works like the Star Wars original trilogy, the She-Ra Netflix show, comic series like Warlord by Mike Grell, or planetary romance kinds of stuff like Princess of Mars, John Carter, Flash Gordon. Shine Your Last is about playing marginalized heroes who jump from planet to planet, kind of do the One Piece travel and build coalitions thing, where they go engage with communities, learn about those communities' crises or dangers, help out with those challenges and dangers, often fighting against a galaxy-conquering church of unity, where this church wants to erase difference and achieve peace through homogeneity. If we didn't have nationality, if we didn't have gender, if we didn't have linguistic differentiation, if we didn't have queerness, if everybody was all exactly the same, wouldn't things be so much better, they say? And then, of course, we have heroes whose differences are part of what makes them special and heroic, who are the ones that are fighting back. And that's Shine Your Last. Captain Cosmo says Hope Punk. Hope Punk is a term that I'm often pretty fond of, but has become incredibly embattled and experienced a lot of semantic dilution, in that people have written about Hope Punk defining it as something that I think is not what Hope Punk is. And there's been lots of criticism of it as being XYZ when I don't think it's any of those things. And so in order to avoid all of those arguments with people I find tiresome, I generally don't use that term a lot, because I don't want people in my mentions ruining my day. We found other terms that we like: defiant fantasy, defiant heroism. You're going to find some people who talk about Hope Punk and are using it in a way that is more reminiscent of how I think about it, or how it was originally defined by the writer Alexander Rowland. But there are reasons why I don't use the term as much. But that's getting into some nitty gritty, getting into the weeds of online discourse kinds of things. So that's Bastion of Hope, which is my frame of epic fantasy where dragons and necromancers have taken over the world, and you play as divinely empowered heroes who are champions of the one free nation that has overthrown their dragon overlord, and now fight to free the rest of the world. So that's the first frame. Then the cyberpunk frame, This Time Nobody Dies, and the space opera frame, Shine Your Last. Also, in addition to all of those, this crowdfunding project is going to support a mechanical nexus, which is a 4th zine filled with custom game mechanics, new adversaries and environments, and other tools to enhance games using any of those 3 frames, or for you to adjust and bring into your own game. The Nexus is going to talk about different ways that these elements or these ideas could manifest in each frame. Like, we could have an adversary stat block for an enforcer squad, is like a tier 2 horde. And then there's a write-up that says, this is a draconic shock team in Bastion of Hope, or it could be that. In This Time Nobody Dies, this could be a corporate a corporate SWAT team. And in Shine Your Last, it could be like an Inquisition squad, right? They're not the biggest, toughest soldiers, but they are enforcers of what? Of the enemies in this particular frame, right? So they are modular, easily reskinnable tools. And this is also going to include like things that would be custom mechanics for a campaign frame, but there are some ideas we have where this would be helpful in all three of these frames. So can we create it and write it in such a way that it's easy to use in each of those frames, but we still provide some resources and some inspiration on how it would specifically look or manifest in each of these three frames. That way you're getting a lot of material that's really, really portable and where you have support in thinking about how to fit it into your own game. Since we know that a lot of people that read or engage with or buy campaign frames are looking for cool rules to use in a different kind of situation. So instead of trying to work around that, we're leaning into it. You can find out even more fun stuff about this project at ttrpg.fund/HDL. These streams are supported and enabled by my supporters over at patreon.com/Michael R. Underwood, as well as Twitch subs here and paid members over at YouTube. And you can always find the VODs of my videos, these streams, at youtube.com/@MikeUnderwood. Patreon is patreon.com/Michael R. Underwood. And that's going to be all for today. Thank you so much to Captain Cosmo, Jaybird Things, Nerdy, Bard and Raven, Adventure Lies Ahead, Etten Entertainment, the Infelix, and everybody else who has been hanging out live or who's watching in the VODs. Next week, I expect we will have a stream talking about or using some of the things that we would then be allowed to use with SRD changes and community gaming license changes. If that is not available for whatever reason, we'll come up with some other kind of topic. And if you have suggestions or requests for topics, you can leave those as comments on the YouTube or bring them up in stream or bring them up over on my Patreon. Captain Cosmo says, thank you for making us better GMs and players. Exactly what I want to hear. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm really glad to hear that these are helpful. That's going to be all for today. And until then, I hope you all do well.